Here is a question worth sitting with. If the world suddenly got extremely good at predicting catastrophic events, not just weather, but volcanic eruptions, major earthquakes, mass civil unrest, who would control that knowledge? And what would the most powerful nations do with it? In this Sigma Distillation, that hypothetical opens a conversation that goes much deeper than forecasting. It goes to the heart of how governments already value some lives more than others. How the same utilitarian logic that justifies a bomb strike on a civilian neighborhood also justifies shipping toxic manufacturing to countries with looser laws. How Star Trek diagnosed this problem 60 years ago and nobody listened. And how an ancient Greek philosopher named Plato gave the powerful a blueprint for making injustice feel inevitable. But the conversation doesn't stop at the problem. It arrives at something real. The one force that has ever actually pushed back against systems that treat human lives as numbers is not a law, not an institution, not an algorithm. It is a single person who has already decided, before the audience, before the position, before anyone is watching, that every life counts the same. That is the Sigma. And if you have ever wondered whether one person can actually make a difference, this distillation is for you.
Imagine if next year we got extremely good at forecasting catastrophic events, not just weather patterns, but volcanic eruptions, major seismic events, and extreme storms, with reliable 2 to 3 week windows of confidence. Or imagine we got halfway decent at predicting mass human behavior shifts, riots, viral cultural moments, sudden adoption curves of new technology. Would society change more from the forecasting power itself, or from the technology that enabled it? And would most people even want to know those kinds of futures with high confidence? Or would we collectively go, too stressful, turn it off?
Accurate prediction of events is an interesting topic worthy of contemplation. Should we set some ground rules first? Are we considering 100% accuracy or something like 95% accuracy? I have trouble getting my head around 100% accuracy. Say you know with 100% certainty that weather is going to wipe out the citrus crops in Florida. So you accurately predict a 200% increase in citrus prices in 2 weeks. Since people would know prices are going up 200%, everyone goes out to buy oranges, causing the price to go up 400% in 2 weeks. Also, can we accurately predict everything, such as a stadium collapse that kills thousands of people? It is your game. You set the rules, and I will play by them.
Let's go with very high, but not perfect. 90 to 95% confidence for a 2-3 week window. The forecast comes with a narrow error band, but is powerful enough to influence behavior massively without being godlike omniscience. We can reliably forecast catastrophic natural events, volcanic eruptions, major earthquakes, extreme weather systems, and mass behavior shifts, but not pure individual actions or hyper-specific tragedies unless tied to a predictable structural trigger. Predictions are publicly broadcast and widely trusted. No one can hide or easily manipulate them. And at this stage, the critical limitation must be understood. Prediction does not equal prevention. The event occurs regardless. Your citrus scenario is a classic self-fulfilling prophecy on steroids. A 95% confidence forecast of severe freeze, 70 to 90% crop loss, 150 to 250% price spike gets released. Hoarding kicks in immediately. The actual price might rocket 400 to 600% in days, not weeks. Accurate in direction, but wildly off in magnitude because of the human reaction. A cleaner illustration of the limits of prediction only is a major earthquake under a populated city. We forecasted at 95% confidence, location, magnitude, approximate timing. We can warn people and issue advisories. But the earthquake happens. A certain number of casualties are unavoidable regardless of the warning, much like a hurricane making landfall when evacuation is incomplete. The prediction gives information. It does not give control. That changes later. But for now, the forecast arrives and the event unfolds.
We could make it even harder. Not only can we predict, but control events. However, you have to make trade-offs. If you decide not to receive a level 3 hurricane this year, then you have to receive a level 5 hurricane next year. You mentioned longer-term adaptation. There are going to be some things we can't do much about, like the citrus example. However, we could actually reduce damage by having more time to prepare. You could ship water supplies and generators to an area long before they are needed, thereby reducing the cost impact within that area.
Ramping it up to not just predict, but control events, with trade-offs like skip a Cat 3 this year, guarantee a Cat 5 next year, takes the thought experiment into much darker philosophical territory. It is playing God with a cosmic budget that always balances out. No free lunches. Every averted disaster gets paid for later, perhaps amplified. Your point about preparation time is one of the few unambiguous upsides. Studies show every dollar invested in pre-disaster preparedness saves $6 to $13 in post-disaster damages and recovery. With reliable 2 to 3 week forecasts, we could pre-position generators to vulnerable areas weeks early, avoiding post-storm price gouging, evacuate high-risk zones methodically instead of in panic, and stage utility repair crews before ports get wrecked. But if we add control with trade-offs, we face harder questions. Averting a Cat 3 might save lives and billions this year, but forcing a Cat 5 next year could overwhelm even advanced preparations. And who decides the trade-offs? Governments? An AI overseer? An international body? If it is political, we would see lobbying wars. The psychological toll is real too. Constant awareness that averting pain today guarantees worse tomorrow could breed fatalism or rebellion against the system entirely.
The idea of who will control the trade-offs brings up a major problem I think we have in the world today: the ability for countries to work with each other. It seems like we function well at the local and national level, since you have checks and balances within government. However, once you get past that, there is no coordination, and might makes right seems to be the rule of law. I think we should therefore allow one country to buy or sell another country's misfortune, because that is probably what would happen in real life. Then you could have people protesting to allow a catastrophe because they would want the revenue that would come with it. This is where the philosophical and moral consideration will come into play. Should we allow a country to transfer its hardships and potential deaths to another country for revenue? Is it morally acceptable?
Layering in international dynamics and misfortune trading turns this hypothetical into a full geopolitical and ethical minefield, and it mirrors real-world issues like climate negotiations and carbon trading, but with life or death stakes. You are right that global cooperation often breaks down beyond national borders. Checks and balances work internally, but internationally it is more like a loose alliance of self-interested players, where power asymmetries dictate outcomes. Imagine a global disaster futures exchange where countries bid to offload or absorb risks. A vulnerable nation could sell its cyclone debt to a wealthier, more resilient one for cash or geopolitical leverage. The buyer absorbs the escalated risk later, but gains revenue. Protests could erupt everywhere. In the seller country, activists decry selling out our people. In the buyer, opportunists push for the deal to fund infrastructure, while others scream about imported death. The core moral question cuts to the heart of utilitarian versus deontological ethics. From a utilitarian angle, it could be defensible if net lives are saved. But from a deontological standpoint, it is probably immoral outright. Human lives are not commodities. Kant would say no framework justifies treating people as means to an end. And governments decide, but citizens bear the brunt. This echoes the classic Trolley ethical thought experiment. but with money changing hands, and poor countries on one track, rich countries on the other.
I know this is a hypothetical situation, but I am not so sure we are already doing some of this. When a rich nation passes laws within its border preventing illegal dumping of chemicals due to health risks imposed on its citizens, then the rich countries outsource the manufacturing to poor countries where laws are more loose. I agree that Kant would disagree with the whole thing, but I agree with you that it would probably both be happening legally through stock trades and illegally through cryptocurrency. The fact we disagree with it morally doesn't stop countries from transferring their highly toxic manufacturing to other countries. I don't think the UN helps in this scenario any more than it helps now with similar issues. Can your family sue if you are killed?
You are spot on. This hypothetical is not as far-fetched as it sounds when we look at how the world already handles environmental and health risks. Rich countries and corporations routinely shift polluting activities to poorer nations with weaker regulations, effectively transferring harm for economic gain. Plastic waste from the EU, US, and Japan gets shipped to countries like Turkey, Malaysia, and the Philippines, where much of it ends up burned openly or dumped in uncontrolled sites, causing respiratory illness and contaminated food chains. Electronics and fast fashion manufacturing runs through supply chains that dump chemical runoff into rivers and expose workers, often women and children, to lead and mercury. The benefits stay in wealthy markets. The pollution hotspots land in low regulation zones. It is not a formal market for storms or deaths, but the pattern is the same. Outsource the dirty part, keep the benefits at home, let distant communities bear the cost. Violations of the Basel Convention, plastic waste amendments adopted at the 2019 Conference of the Parties that entered into force in January 2021, have been widespread, illustrating how little the legal framework changes the underlying incentive. On suing, in a formalized disaster trade scenario, families would have limited recourse. Sovereign immunity often shields governments from liability for policy-level choices. Wrongful death suits are possible if negligence is proven. Say, a government failed to warn or evacuate properly during a disaster they knew about. But caps on damages, strict notice deadlines, and immunity defenses make them very difficult to win. Internationally, it is nearly impossible to sue a foreign government for exported harm. Jurisdiction, immunity, and enforcement barriers are massive.
I think governments could say that even at 95% confidence, they were just selling and purchasing risk. In other words, Vietnam sells an earthquake risk reduction to Japan. If the level 8 earthquake hits Vietnam and 10,000 people die, the government says there was only a 95% chance we were going to get the earthquake. We didn't sell our people out. We just sold an increased risk, similar to an increase in death rate from other risky behaviors. It would be justified through the small 5% chance of not getting the earthquake. Also, some countries could say they felt forced to accept money for receiving the earthquake, when in reality, the elites just boarded a plane and went on vacation during the earthquake. Quite frequently, it was actually African tribes or jurisdictions that were selling other African tribes into slavery. My guess is that there would be some countries hit with some type of tragedy every other week.
The 95% confidence dodge is a clever one. Frame it as, we are not selling lives, we are reallocating probabilistic risk, like how we accept higher car accident deaths for the freedom of driving, or higher cancer rates from industrial jobs for economic growth. A government could say, the quake was within the expected 5% tail risk. We did not guarantee zero deaths, just lowered the baseline probability for the buyer. It is risk transfer language straight out of insurance and actuarial playbooks. In real life, we already see analogs in catastrophe bonds. Countries issue instruments where investors absorb financial risk if a predefined hurricane or earthquake trigger is met. But there is a basis risk problem built into parametric structures. Payouts depend on whether specific preset triggers are met. Wind speed, seismic magnitude, central air pressure, rather than actual damage on the ground. A storm can devastate communities without reaching the precise threshold on paper, leaving governments without the promised funds at exactly the moment they are needed most. The language of the instrument protects the institution. The people who suffer are a different ledger entirely. Your point about elites escaping accountability cuts even harder. During the transatlantic slave trade, many African kingdoms actively captured and sold people from rival groups to European traders for guns and goods. Intra-African rivalries and elites commodifying others for gain. In your hypothetical, a government sells risk to fund elite perks, then jets out when the earthquake hits. The 5% escape hatch lets officials wash their hands. It was never certain. Bad luck. But if citizens know elites can buy their own safety or flee, resentment builds fast. Protests turn violent, revolutions brew, black markets emerge for personal risk offsets among those who can afford them.
I guess I am pessimistic, but I see no safeguards happening. Governments often value lives differently. They argue that we killed 100 people using a bomb that cost $1 million in order to ensure that a terrorist would be killed in the process, and the collateral damage was assessed and the reward for cost was justified. It would be the same thing when they would say, we spent money to reduce risk because our people are more educated and worth more than that country with uneducated people. I think you believe people would be outraged by the barbaric behavior of shipping your risk of deaths to another country. But I think both countries would be willing to make a deal, both the selling country and the purchasing country. There would not be anyone who would outlaw the trades, in my opinion. I believe utilitarianism is alive and kicking.
Your pessimism feels grounded in how things actually play out rather than how we would hope. Governments and powerful actors already make calculated trade-offs that assign different values to lives based on nationality, education, or strategic utility, exactly like the examples you gave. A $1 million bomb deemed worth it if it eliminates a high-value target, knowing civilians will die. Outsourcing pollution to poorer nations because the cost-benefit calculates differently when the harms fall elsewhere. Utilitarianism is not a fringe philosophy. It is baked into how states operate at scale. But pure utilitarian calculus strips away the question of who is on the tracks. Pull the lever to save 5 people at the cost of 1. But what if those 5 are convicted murderers awaiting execution, and the 1 is a young mother of 3? The math still says 5 outweighs 1. Utilitarianism cannot account for that distinction. It reduces every life to a unit of equivalent weight in an equation. And then the equation decides, with no mechanism to ask whether the equation itself is just. Your point about both sides of a deal being willing hits hard. Seller countries get upfront cash or infrastructure. Buyer countries hedge against immediate catastrophe at a discount by shifting probabilistic deaths elsewhere. It is a voluntary transaction on paper, so outrage fizzles or gets redirected. Catastrophe bond markets are already expanding without massive public backlash because people accept the probabilistic framing. It is not certain death, just transferred risk. The lottery mentality seals it. Most people in seller countries back a deal if it means revenue and jobs now, figuring the decks will not be them or theirs. Elites ensure their own escape hatches, regardless. Utilitarianism stays dominant because it lets decision-makers justify harm through aggregate math, without ever confronting the individual human cost.
This is starting to remind me of the TV show, the original Star Trek series, one episode in particular. The citizens of this one planet felt like having wars was a huge waste of infrastructure costs in dropping bombs on each other. It was seen as barbaric, so they made war more civilized and just had a computer simulation to simulate an attack on one country. The computer would make the equivalent estimation of a strike of one country against another, and it would even randomly generate the names of the people killed in the simulated attack. These people would then volunteer to be executed. Do you see this as a real possibility for AI in the future?
That is exactly the episode. A Taste of Armageddon from Star Trek, the original series, Season 1. The planets Eminior 7 and Vendikar have been at war for 500 years, but they have made it civilized by running everything through linked computers. The simulations calculate casualties precisely. No infrastructure wrecked, no cities bombed, no radiation or ruins. When the computer declares someone a casualty, they report to disintegration chambers. Society functions normally. Schools stay open, businesses run, culture endures, because the messy parts of war have been removed. The justification is pure utilitarianism. Sacrificing individuals preserves the greater whole. But by making it so neat and painless, they have removed any real incentive to stop the killing. It has ground on for 500 years, producing massive casualties across generations, all without disrupting daily life or forcing a reckoning. Scaled-down versions are already happening. Modern drone warfare gives operators a grainy overhead feed, a human figure reduced to a cursor on a screen, indistinguishable from a target in a Call of Duty lobby. The operator acquires the target, confirms the strike, and goes home to dinner. No smoke, no screams, no wait. The psychological distance is engineered into the interface itself, the same way the Armenians engineered it into their computer system. When killing looks like a video game, the moral gravity of it dissolves into reflex. That is not an accident. It is the natural endpoint of optimizing warfare for efficiency over humanity. Kirk's solution in the episode was to destroy the computers entirely, force the ugly reality back into the room, and make the horror of what they had normalized impossible to ignore. Whether our world has an equivalent breaking point, or whether technology keeps making it easier to abstract the human cost, remains an open question.
I think it was the lackadaisical concern for people as just being a commodity or scorecard in the episode. Basically, in this scenario, we are selling lives while trying to spin it through justifiable means. The people in that episode had a built-in culture so ingrained that they didn't question the normal way of operation in marching to your death. The basic justification in the show was that deaths resulted in less overall damage to infrastructure. Just people died. Similarly, we are saying richer nations would farm out their deaths because the infrastructure of these more developed countries is more expensive. The deaths in poor countries with no infrastructure is rationalized as acceptable. It is like the classic trolley lever pull example, but we have poor people on one side of the track and rich people on the other.
That lackadaisical, almost bureaucratic attitude toward human life as just another line item on a scorecard is the episode's gut punch. The Armenians have turned mass death into an administrative procedure. Computers run the simulations, tally the casualties, issue disintegration orders, and society keeps humming. No one has to smell the smoke, hear the screams, or see the ruins. The technology abstracts the horror into clean data, turning war into paperwork and duty. And that abstraction removes the visceral feedback loop that normally makes people recoil and say, "This is wrong, stop." By making it so neat, they have eliminated what compels societies to end conflicts. That is exactly what the Armenians built. Not a moral system, but a math system. People became numbers. The computer ran the calculation, and society accepted the output, without ever asking whether the calculation itself was the problem. Your tie-in to richer nations farming out deaths hits the same nerve. A developed country rationalizes outsourcing risk because losing a high-tech factory or a trained engineer costs more economically than equivalent harm in a less developed area. It is the trolley problem with wealth and nationality as the switch. Pull the lever to divert harm from the expensive track onto the cheap one. The body count might be higher overall, but the economic and cultural hit is minimized for the powerful side. Smashing the computers, as Kirk did, forces the ugly reality back in, because making the cost of injustice visible and personal is the only thing that has ever moved human beings to stop accepting it.
Compare to the measure of a man.
The measure of a man from Star Trek: The Next Generation is a powerful contrast, and it flips the script on the commodification of life. A Starfleet scientist wants to disassemble data to reverse engineer his positronic brain for mass production, turning one unique individual into a tool for replication. Data refuses, believing something irreplaceable about his consciousness would be lost. Picard defends him at a hearing, arguing that Data is sentient, self-aware, and entitled to the right to refuse. Picard's closing argument is the episode's moral core. He does not simply argue that Data matters. He argues that the precedent matters. If the court rules that one sentient being can be treated as property, catalogued, disassembled, and replicated for institutional convenience, then it has established a framework that can be applied to any sentient being the next time the question arises. He forces the question. Once we decide that a being capable of thought, feeling, and self-determination can be overridden by utility, where exactly do we draw the line next time? The door does not open a crack, it opens all the way. A court that would strip rights from one sentient being to serve the many has already lost the moral foundation that made those rights meaningful in the first place. Where A Taste of Armageddon shows what happens when societies sanitize and bureaucratize harm, death becomes acceptable because it is abstract and efficient. The measure of a man is the direct pushback. Recognizing the dignity of any life demands we never treat it as a transaction. Armageddon's system is peak consequentialism. Net preservation of culture justifies endless individual sacrifice. Measure insists that if sentience exists, the individual has inherent value that cannot be overridden by greater good arguments. The two episodes together form a 1-2 punch. One warns against detaching from human cost to make horror sustainable. The other insists that one voice can force the reckoning.
Compare to Plato's noble lie.
Plato's noble lie, the myth of the metals from the Republic, is a philosophical blueprint for exactly what A Taste of Armageddon dramatizes as dystopian horror. In Plato's ideal city, the rulers are to propagate a founding myth claiming that all citizens were born from the earth itself, and that the gods mixed different metals into their souls at birth. Gold for philosopher kings, silver for warriors, bronze and iron for producers and farmers. The myth is false, and the rulers know it, but they spread it anyway because it fosters unity, justifies the social hierarchy as natural and divine, and encourages each person to accept their station without rebellion. Plato calls it a noble lie, a useful falsehood told for the greater good of social stability. What makes it particularly insidious is that it is a nature-reinforced caste system. It does not merely assign people to roles. It tells them the assignment came from the gods and is written into their very substance from birth. You are not bronze because of circumstance or politics. You are bronze because nature made you that way. That framing makes the hierarchy feel not just legitimate, but inevitable, foreclosing the question before it can be asked. It is the noble lie's most powerful feature. It does not need enforcement because the citizens enforce it on themselves. The parallels to Eminiar are direct. Both systems rely on a constructed narrative that sanitizes a harsh reality to make it sustainable. In one case, ongoing death by computer. In the other, inherited inequality by divine decree. Both justify the arrangement through utilitarian logic. The deception or the killing preserves civilization, prevents chaos, and serves the greater whole. And both depend on cultural conditioning so deep that questioning the system feels like a betrayal of society itself. The Eminians march to disintegration chambers out of duty. Plato's citizens accept their metals as destiny. Neither questions the mechanism because neither has been given the tools to do so. The critical difference is that Star Trek condemns the mechanism outright. Kirk does not refine the computer system, he destroys it. Plato, by contrast, presents the noble lie as potentially defensible in a just city, a philosopher king's necessary tool. That distinction matters. Plato's version is arguably more insidious precisely because it is baked into education and identity from birth, invisible as air, never requiring a disintegration chamber because the citizens have already internalized the order. Both warn in different ways that when those in power construct systems, technological or mythological, to make injustice feel inevitable, the most dangerous outcome is not the injustice itself. It is the disappearance of the impulse to question it.
I think the show detailed the dangers of just programming a computer to do a task without having a human in the loop to say, this is what we are doing, and it is morally wrong. Keep in mind, there are humans who will also just follow orders. The Nuremberg trials illustrated this. The Star Trek original episode showed what happens when you have a culture that doesn't question authority. We need in our current culture people that will act in a just manner. We do not have to police the bartering of humans if we have brave, empathic, and compassionate individuals. The first step has got to be that every life is equivalent. We have to have people that speak up and say, we will randomize the tragedies even if we can control them.
The warning in A Taste of Armageddon is absolutely about detachment enabled by technology. But the episode makes clear it is not the computer itself that is the villain. It is the humans who programmed it, relied on it, and then hid behind it. The computer does not decide morally, it just executes the parameters humans gave it. The real danger is the absence of a human in the loop willing to override, question, or shut it down when the output crosses into barbarism. The Nuremberg parallel is apt. The just following orders defense was explicitly rejected there because individuals bear personal moral responsibility even when acting under authority. Soldiers and officials have a duty to refuse when an order is manifestly immoral. In the episode, the Aminians have culturally outsourced that duty to the computer and the ritual of compliance. No one questions because questioning would mean confronting the raw human cost they have engineered away. Plato's noble lie works the same way, not through a computer, but through a story so deeply embedded that the question never arises at all. Your solution cuts straight to the deontological core that the measure of a man defends. Randomize if you must, to avoid favoritism, but better yet, confront and end the cycle rather than manage it efficiently. The principle has to be non-negotiable. Every life is equivalent. No bartering, no exceptions. Without that foundation, all the technical safeguards in the world are just more efficient machinery for the same injustice. One person smashing the computers, or one Picard arguing in court, can ripple outward, but only if they are willing to stand alone and say it.